who is Ed Callaghan from Berkeley. I think, Ed, I saw you in the room.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Ed. Go ahead and share your screen.
How's that? Good?
That looks great. So again, our next speaker is Ed Callaghan. He is the third of our Neutrino MTV Neutrino Fellowship awardees that we awarded, I guess it was late last year. He is a third-year student from the physics department at UC Berkeley, and he's going to talk to us today about proton light yield in water-based liquid scintillator. So please, Ed, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. So as Sean said, I'll talk about a project at Berkeley to measure the proton light yield water-based liquid scintillator, or as we call it, WBLS. Okay. And I want to point out, I wrote with, okay, but this work was done critically with Bethany Goldblum, who many people on the call know, and her team. So as a quick intro, maybe not everyone's an expert, but certainly people on the call know conventional nuclear activity comes with the non-negotiable emission of antineutrinos, right? These can be detected typically through inverse beta decay reactions, and that will be the case at the upcoming NE1 detector over in Boulby. Now, what the detector will be filled with is not yet decided. Could be gadiated water, could be some sort of scintillator, but in any case, one background to a reactor IBD measurement will be local neutrons, okay, from the surrounding rock, the enter your detector, moderate down to thermal energies, eventually capture. Now, in a scintillating detector, even WBLS, you stand some chance of actually tagging these as fast neutrons, right? Because you're sensitive to the scintillation light from recoil protons during the moderation process. And that's, of course, going to be quenched, right, relative to a positron or an electron. But you need to know what it is. You need to know what protons, quote, look like as a function of energy, right? And that's what we're trying to measure. So how this relates to NNSA, right? It's the non-pro angle, right? So all of this AIT NE1 business ultimately stems from the longstanding Watchman effort, right? The idealized deliverable of which has been reactor monitoring using neutrino detectors. Okay, so that's why the NNSA is and should be interested in seeing this through. So in detail, right, we employ a so-called double time of flight method. Okay, this is a technique developed by Bethany and company over the past few years. And what you need to make this work is a pulsed neutron source and multiple detectors, okay? What we use, okay, at the 88-inch cyclotron, we order up a monoenergetic deuteron beam, okay, 33 MeV, and impinge that on a target made of beryllium, okay? Breakup reactions upon collision release one, a population of photons, which we use for calibration purposes, and two, a broad spectrum neutron beam, okay, essentially from beam energy down to zero. Those enter along this kind of arrow I've drawn into the green cell. Okay, that's our target cell filled with WBLS or whatever you're measuring. And now the beam is pulsed, right? So when they scatter inside that cell, the gammas off of electrons or the neutrons off of protons, you can measure the time difference, right, between production and detection of the target cell, and thus you know the energy. Okay, if it's a neutron, you know the energy before scatter. Okay. Now off on the side at forward kind of scattering angles, right, we have this array of auxiliary cells filled with something else. Okay, use EJ309 for those in the know. It's a commercial scintillator that has an established particle ID capability. Okay, you can tell the difference between gammas and neutrons. And we play the same game there. Okay, after scattering, we require coincidence, right? That once we saw something in the target cell, we see something off in the side as well. Okay, we can measure the time of flight there as well. So we measure two times or two energies, right? Neutron energy before scattering and after. We unambiguously know the neutron energy, the energy deposited to the proton. Okay, that's how we measure energy. Measuring light, well, we just use conventional phototubes, okay? And the charge collected in the tube after some corrections is a proxy for the light, okay? We actually measure two samples, so-called 5% WBLS. That's just a certain loading of the LS and the W, and a pure scintillator sample, LABPPO for those in the know. I'm not going to dwell on this slide. This is just to give you a sketch of what goes into the analysis. Again, the important ingredients are multiple measurements of time, okay, in the top left. In the bottom right, an understanding of what you're reading out of your PMT, okay, what charge means. And then, for our kind of specific implementation at the cyclotron, we need PID and auxiliary detectors, okay? And what we get out is the relative light yield, okay? The scaling of how much light comes from protons as a function of energy, okay? So what the calibrations look like, it's all done using gammas, okay? So to calibrate charge, right, we need to find some reference charge that everything scales with respect to. And we do that using a radioactive source, okay? Just a regular button source, here we use cesium. I'm not going to go into the details, right? It could be a talk in and of itself, but suffice it to say, we look at the Compton edge, okay, associated with this button source, and are able to extract a reference charge value associated with a fixed energy electron, okay, where that energy is the energy of the Compton edge. Okay. Calibrating energies, okay, is a little bit trickier, right? We use gammas produced by the beam. We select them that using PID in the auxiliary cells, right? What's shown on the left and the right here are just distributions of clock differences, right? Between on the left, when the cyclotron pulsed, and we saw something in the target cell, okay, there's this clear isochronic signal, those are the photons, okay? And the same for one of those outgoing legs, okay, from the target cell to one of the auxiliary cells. And you see the same thing, isochronic signal. Okay, we get out of that, we're able to calibrate out, offsets due to cable delays and clock differences, and a couple other effects. But we also get, the resolution that we measure time with, which of course influences the resolution we have on energy. So once calibrations are performed, then it's time to look at the neutrons to actually make the measurement, okay? So that's achieved, again, using PID in the auxiliary cells. Example of that is shown here in the bottom left, right? This is just two kind of properties of the pulses we see in those cells on an event-by-event basis. Plotted against each other, there are these two populations, this lower band of the gammas we select on for calibrations, the upper band of the neutrons we select on to make the measurement. This right-hand figure just shows that we make that kind of selection, the discrimination in a semi-optimized manner. Doing so, remember we have multiple measures of energy, so we can actually enforce kinematic consistency requirements on top of that, to gain confidence that the events we're selecting really are proton recoils. And doing so, we arrive at a 2D population of charge energy pairs, right? Which is great, but we really want to extract a 1D form from that, right? The dependence of the light yield on energy. So to do that, we take the 2D population and bin in proton energy, okay? And then assign a representative charge to each bin, right? Now the size of the bins is arbitrary, but we're guided by what we think the resolution we have on reconstructing proton energies is, okay? And that's shown, it's influenced by, timing resolution and the geometry of the setup, and predominantly, but that's shown in the top right. So for WBLS, it's the orange curve, 10 and 15% depending on the energy. Okay. So what that looks like, this is real data, again, this is beam data, right? Neutron selection applied. In the top left, this is that 2D population I talked about, right? Charge energy pairs, okay? And yeah, sure, there's some background you see, but it's this obvious correlated band, okay? And that is, the genuine proton recoils, okay? So these bins in proton energy that I described, these correspond to vertical bands taken along this 2D plot. Okay, and then within each vertical band, we fit the population of charges we see. The model is empirical, okay, it's a Gaussian for the proton recoils and just an exponential or two to soak up the background, but that seems to work well enough. Examples of that are shown in the bottom row, okay. When we get out of that, are yes, a representative charge or representative light level, energy range, and a statistical uncertainty with that, okay. So then we scale by the reference charge that we found using the cesium source, right? Fold in a couple of systematics associated with the various calibrations and just with the geometry and setup. And you get the 1D kind of form shown in the top right? The light yield versus energy, okay? It's preliminary, but that's pretty much the result, okay? That's what we're after. So where do we go? Well, one thing is still missing, okay? This is what we call the nonlinearity correction. So our PMT and digitizer system, right, is known to have a slight degradation. So the beauty of the cyclotron implementation, right, is that this measurement occurs continuously over a relatively large energy range, right? I've shown from 2 to 20 MeV, but we're not hard limited at those bounds. But because of that, it's over a relatively large range in light levels. And if you double the amount of light you see on the phototube, you don't necessarily read out twice as much charge, okay? So that needs to be corrected for. The methodology exists. Bethany's team has implemented it in the past for other measurements. Unfortunately, that effort has stalled for this measurement because of the unfortunate virus outbreak, but progress is being made. And once we've done that and we're confident that the light yield results are robust, then we turn a critical eye on them and say, well, do they make sense in the context of any models that are out there? Everyone's favorite is Burke's law, but of course there are others. And once we're 100% sure, okay, we know what we're doing to get the light yield results and how to assess the validity of the light yield results, or really just put them into a greater context, then we release the full data set. Everything I've shown has been kind of a developmental analysis on a fraction of the data set, but we really took a blind approach. And so I'll be really excited when we get to the stage that we open floodgates, right, and look at everything in high stakes. So, the impact of this measurement in immediate scale, okay, we hand this off to people in any one, right, and we enable proper studies of the fast neutron rejection capabilities of a WBLS field anywhere, okay. Hopefully, right, ideally that will lead to effective suppression of fast neutrons as a background for IBD-based measurements. That would be great, but TBD. As a bonus, okay, it's not really a non-pro goal, but it's very, very cool. I think everyone will agree. Supernovas, okay? Everybody talks about the supernova neutrinos that we should be detecting, any year now. It turns out if you want to measure the energy spectrum of those neutrinos, elastic neutrino proton scattering is a favorable channel in which to do that. Okay, so as a bonus, once this measurement is out there, any WBLS field detector can make that measurement. Okay, which is super, super interesting. So the impact of the consortium, on me, there's been a lot of professional development, right? It's been amazing working with the cyclotron. Working with Bethany's group has been a great, great experience. And on the larger scale, right, this consortium encompasses a lot more than just my bubble. Okay, so I'm talking about the explosion monitoring, right? The biological response studies, right? Things that I would not encounter in any amount of depth, right? Doing a run-of-the-mill degree in neutrino physics, right? And that all kind of points to the larger kind of development of technical skills, at the NNSA wants American scientists to have, right? So it's really, really been a fantastic experience. Not even to mention, okay, the cross-consortium collaboration, right? Bethany's group is very deeply involved with the NSSC, okay? So now you have these two independent programs, right? Synthesizing together, right? To really, really enable great science and make this great work happen. So that's been really fantastic. And the technology, okay? So the WBO doesn't have to be, right? So, in the past, we've gotten bites from people in medical physics, right? Thinking, well, maybe this might be suitable for, using a PET scanner or something like that, right? So, if you're looking for new simulators, right, let us know, right? We can talk. So, in conclusion, I'm going to show this photo of, this is what WBLS looks like, okay? So the simulator that gets loaded is basically a dish soap, okay? It's used in dish soap, right? So when you put it in the water, shake it up, you get these bubbles, okay? So in conclusion, we've taken the data, right? We turned the cyclotron on, took data suitable for a proton light yield measurement in WBLS and LDPO. One thing that remains, okay, is this nonlinear correction, but we know what we're doing, and we're doing it, albeit at a reduced pace. Other than that, though, things make sense, okay? Preliminary light yield results look good, and we're rapidly converging on the final results, okay? So it's a really, really exciting time. So, of course, thanks to everybody, right? Thank the NSSA, right, for founding the consortium and making all of this possible. Thanks to the consortium, okay, for my fellowship, right, which enables this, and just, on a wider scale, the opportunity to do this work, okay? It's been really, really fantastic. And of course, myself and Gabriel want to thank, Bethany and her whole team, right, for the very, very central role they played in making this measurement happen, okay? And thank all of you for your attention.
Great, Ed. Thanks for that great talk. Really interesting experiment. I have some questions, but I'd like to give others a chance. If there's any questions from the floor, please speak up.
I have a very quick question.
Please, Chris, go ahead.
I apologize if I might have missed this in the presentation, but just a short question. What is the minimum neutron energy that you expect to be able to resolve with your WBLS detector?
Yeah, so that's part of why we're making the measurement, right? We don't really know. I can say preliminarily, so I've cut things off at 2 MeV. It looks like in this setup, we can go down a little bit below, but below that, it'll depend on, for example, if we were to put this in any one, it'll depend on the exact size and what the backgrounds are like, I think.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I was just kind of curious. That's all.
Yeah, I had a similar question actually. I noticed that this preliminary quenching function was cut off around 2 MeV, and I was wondering what led you to that 2 MeV lower cutoff. What was the reason you didn't go down further?
Yeah. So call it arbitrary, right? So the analysis has been developed on 20%, right? But that 20% is arbitrary. It's the same thing. Basically, this 2D plot. We zoom in, and I pretty much made a judgment call. I said, well, it's going to be easy at 2 MeV and above. So let's be sure we really know what we're doing, and then we'll make an effort to press the level.
Yeah, this 2D plot is in the water-based simulator, or it's in the back in the ESA 309 detectors?
This is in the water-based simulator.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Can you speak a bit about the horizontal error bars on the light yield function as well?
This has been, well, they're not error bars. That's So it's really just describing the energy range over which the data point applies. Of course, there is IRR associated with the energy reconstruction, but we don't, that can be thought of them as a systematic. Really, this is just to designate, an energy range.
It's more of a kind of a range, or I've been with based on the flight path and other things.
Exactly right. You need to boil down your 2D information to the 1D dependence.
That makes sense.
And that's how we do it. We just.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer
Great.
the question? Yeah.
It does. Yeah. Other questions for Ed? A question from the chat asks, what electronics were you using to measure the lead output from 477 kV all the way up to 10 MeV-EE? So I guess it's questions getting at your dynamic range in your digitization electronics that enabled such a measurement over a wide energy range.
Yeah, so these is Kane digitizers, V1730s for those who know. Yeah, so it's a 2-volt dynamic range. And maybe it wouldn't work but for the quenching, but it's appropriate at the bias we ran at. That required some tuning, right?
Yeah, makes sense. Can you speak a bit more about the setup? So you showed the setup on one of the earlier slides. I was trying to work out the dimensions of those detectors and what the flight path is. Can you talk a little bit about the flight path from the water-based detector to the auxiliary detectors and proximity to floor? I guess room scatter, is that an issue? Can you speak a bit about that?
Sure. So a picture's worth 1,000 words, so it would have been good to include one. But it looks a lot like this. Okay, so here's a target cell. Now this plane that I've drawn really is a wall. Okay, it's the wall of the room that all this occurs in. About 6 meters back, in the reverse direction from the arrow, from the wall is where the actual breakup occurs. Okay, and it's also raised a little bit, so it's a little bit more than 7 meters from the breakup target into the target, whatever it is, here WBLS. These cells, okay, they're looking at forward scattering angles, right, because they're scattering off the protons. So you're going to be cut off at 90 degrees. They're located, it depends. There are 11 of them, but it's roughly 1 meter to 1.5 meters between them. And then, there's another wall behind them. So were you asking about, backgrounds associated with other things?
I was just curious if you had any issue with room scatter in this lab, because when you do the time of flight, you're assuming a flight path, right? So if you have a significant scatter contribution, that can complicate things. So I was just more curious about, I've not been in this lab, so I was more curious about the setup here and if you had an issue with those types of backgrounds.
So I wouldn't call it an issue. It's harder than it needs to be, and because the cyclotron is an old facility, and we call them caves, okay, the experimental halls, and in the cave where we did this measurement, which is where Bethany's group has been for a long time, they also do isotope production experiments. So the room was kind of hot. And so it can be tricky, if you try to select on, gammas in the target, using PIN information out here, you find that there's a very, very high uncorrelated background just from the walls. But we found ways around that. And the good news is that, since this measurement was performed, Bethany's group has moved to a cleaner hall. It's much more radio quiet. So future measurements won't be as difficult. But yeah, it does pop up. If that answers your question.
Oh, got it. Thank you. Any final questions before we move on?